astounding change.
The discipline of the German army is quickly going, and the German officer is no longer what he was. It seems to me to be the beginning of the end.
I think the Boche must retire along his whole front before the winter. You have every reason to be cheerful at home. But of course you mustn't suppose that it's anything in the nature of a walkover yet. He has still got plenty of kick in him. If we are allowed to live together again after the war, we will do something with our lives to show our gratitude for God's goodness. But of course, I'm not home yet.
The biggest transformation of all was the arrival en masse of the Americans, under their commander, General John J. Pershing. The sheer force of extra manpower would mean that however long it took, the Allies were bound to win in the end. By July 1918, a year after they'd first begun to arrive, there were 1 million Americans on the Western Front. Allied confidence was swelled by their new allies.
There are plenty of Americans along the line. There's grown a wonderful mutual understanding between our boys and the Yanks. I'm sure the Yanks are going to prove excellent fighting troops.
I loved it. Gained weight, and I fairly bounced out of bed in the morning, oozing with pep.
In mid-September 1918, the Americans launched their first attack as an independent army. Their target, the wedge of German-held territory at Saint-Mihiel. It was a triumph. Pershing was jubilant.
Saint-Mihiel probably did more than any single operation of the war to encourage the tired Allies.
A few days after Saint-Mihiel, an American force joined the British and French for a major attack on the German army's key defensive rear position, the Hindenburg Line.
The Hindenburg Line was an extremely tough defensive position, consisting of belts of barbed wire, of concrete pillboxes, and the Germans, if they were going to stop the Allies anywhere, it was going to be here.
For the ordinary Allied soldier, taking on the Hindenburg Line seemed an impossible task.
We had attacked it the year before without any success. Now we were going to try again, but no one seemed to think we should do any better this time. Even the Australians said that we should find we were banging our heads against a stone wall.
In the last week of September, 123 Allied divisions, about 500,000 men, gathered. General Foch issued his final order for the offensive which could decide the war.
The nature and importance of this operation requires that all its early gains be followed up without the slightest delay. The rupture of the line of resistance must be exploited with no interruption to as great a depth as possible. For this reason, halts in the progress of the action must be avoided.
The trench stalemate was becoming a thing of the past. With ever more accurate artillery barrages softening up the enemy, Allied soldiers were now realizing Foch's ambition for a war of movement.
We immediately got word to go forward. So with the encumbrance of a Lewis gun, we started. We were very excited and there was a lot of noise. Kept expecting to get knocked out by a shell, but wasn't. We went across ditches and through wire, getting more soaked and torn.
We surge forward. Scarcely have men gone 100 meters when machine gun fire sweeps the plain. Bullets whistle everywhere. We manage to advance nevertheless.
We were in a pretty fine mess. Filthy dirty, all mud, soaking wet up to the thighs and clothes all torn. Brooks was killed in the advance, and I heard that Holt was wounded by a shell.
One British wireless operator followed the infantry over the top to set up a front-line station to report progress. But his unit had lost a vital piece of equipment.
We found we had no aerial. And I went back and found it, and then went back through the trenches, but through the support trenches to take it back. And on the way there, I had to walk over dead men. The only people I had communication with was dead men, you might say, because I had to walk on them and say, sorry, chum.
In 3 days, the Allies suffered thousands of casualties. But on the 29th of September, they broke through the once impregnable Hindenburg Line.
The news from all fronts was simply stupendous. And tomorrow we should join in. It was going to be the biggest battle of the war and the greatest victory. The Boche simply hadn't a chance. "We shall go through them," the colonel said, "like a knife through butter. We shall be eating our Christmas dinner in Berlin." They convinced me. I'd seen with my own eyes that our task looked impossible. But their enthusiasm was so great that I was persuaded.
The impetus was now general. All the Allied armies were attacking in turn. The enemy was not given a moment's respite. He was to be continually harassed until victory was within our grasp.
The breaking of the Hindenburg Line was a huge psychological blow to the German army. Ludendorff, its most aggressive commander, decided that while his soldiers still retained some fighting ability, an armistice should be sought with the Allies. But for Ludendorff, it had to be an armistice which preserved German pride and territory. Back in January, President Wilson of America had proposed a 14-point plan for a peace that would be honorable to all sides. Allied leaders and commanders now gathered to discuss peace terms that could be offered to Germany. At the same time, Germany appealed directly to America.
The Germans decided the only game left in town was to attempt to separate the United States from Britain and France, and tried to negotiate with the Americans on the basis of accepting the 14 points. Now, this was a completely transparent move to try and, if you like, get out of jail free card. And nobody, including the Americans, were prepared to accept it.
The British and French demanded, as part of any peace settlement, the abolition of the German monarchy. To traditionalists like Ludendorff, this was an affront. With the German army apparently still willing to fight on, Ludendorff had now recovered his nerve, and hopes of peace were shattered. Though it was nearing its death throes, the war was not finished yet. By mid-October 1918, a sense of doom had spread to the German home front. The Allied naval blockade had cut off most of Germany's food supply. Its ships were stuck in port. People were starving. In the field, rations were diminishing by the day. Despite General Ludendorff's determination to fight on, other German commanders knew the game was up.
The morale of the troops has suffered seriously, and their power of resisting diminishes daily. They surrender in hordes whenever the enemy attacks. I do not believe there is any possibility of holding out over December. Ludendorff does not realize the whole seriousness of the situation. Whatever happens, we must obtain peace before the enemy breaks through into Germany. If he does, woe on us.
As Germany fought pointlessly on, for the Allies' exhausted soldiers, it seemed a more wasteful war than ever.
How I wish the Hun would chuck it before we lose thousands more valuable lives. I can imagine the man in the trench being very disinclined to pop the parapet, with peace so close at hand. Oh, I am weary of this war.
The casualties reported today are 253 officers and 6,000 men. Our casualties for many weeks past have been enormous. They must have averaged 30 to 40,000 per week. The hospitals are full to overflowing. One volunteer orderly told me that some of the cases sent over were so bad that they were actually packed up in boxes.
I think it is safe to say that it cannot be much longer. The Huns we met were certainly nothing to fear, and could think of nothing but peace.
French and Belgian refugees returned to villages and towns which had been occupied by the German army and ruined by war. By early November, most German soldiers could clearly see the ruin within their own ranks.
The German armies were in very bad shape. Every soldier and civilian was hungry. Losses in material could not be replaced, and the soldiers arriving at the front were too young, poorly trained and often unwilling to risk their necks because the war looked like a lost cause.
Ludendorff still wanted to fight and called on German troops to reject all proposals for peace. But then came sudden collapse. On October the 26th, the Kaiser sacked Ludendorff for insubordination. 2 weeks later, the Kaiser himself abdicated and went into exile. The German politicians left behind knew they had to submit to Allied terms. At 5 o'clock on the morning of November the 11th, an armistice was signed on a train in the French forest of Compiègne. At 11 o'clock, on the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns of the Western Front fell silent.
Everything stopped, and there was what I can only call as a deadly hush over everything. And we all stopped, looked at one another, because we suddenly realized that we had no objective, nothing whatever to look forward to do. Nothing to do. It was a very eerie feeling.
You have won the greatest battle in history and rescued the most sacred of all causes, the liberty of the world. You have full right to be proud, for you have crowned your standards with immortal glory and won the gratitude of posterity.
We went mad. Went mad. The gates was open, everybody went ashore. We was dancing in the streets with the wounded soldiers and the girls. All went mad.
I suppose it was the most remarkable day in the history of the world. The streets soon became so crowded that it was impossible to move. The crowds were cheering. Young girls were being carried on the shoulders of soldiers. Soldiers were being carried in the arms of civilians.
The thought of going home made us noisy and hilarious. We'll soon turn in our mules and go home where we can eat sugar, sleep in bed, see our folks, and chase around with girls.
Girlfriends, sons, daughters, and above all mothers embraced the returning heroes.
She was only too glad to get me back because I was her sonny boy. She made so much fuss of me. She was glad to have me back. I think that was the utmost thought in her mind. I'm glad he's home safe.
While we were going through the formalities of disembarking, a strange and unreal thought was running through my mind. I had a future.